My name's Garth Nowland-Foreman. I'm one of the partners of Lead, which runs training, coaching, and support services for people who are involved in community benefit organisations, non-profits, charities, social enterprises, whatever. And one of the areas that we particularly focus on is governance, because we think that's an important area. And as you heard, this is the third last of a year's worth of governance bites that have been funded by the Rātā Foundation, and we've just got 2 more to go. Should just also let people know that as a part of that, Rātā have funded for some of my time to be available for just one-on-one sessions or coaching time with any non-profit organisation in Marlborough. So if there's stuff you'd like to follow up further, have a conversation about, if you organise it in conjunction with one of my trips up here, then there's no cost, but if you want to organise it at another time, then we just need to cover my travel costs from Christchurch, where I'm based. So you can just email me or talk to me about that before you go, if you want to follow up with those ideas. So we've still got a couple of months where that's available. My email address is just, you can hardly see it, with garth@leeds.org.nz. And hopefully it's in a few other places too. And I have got some cards if you want to grab one later on. That's pretty enough for me. So this is really, each of these little bites of governance issues are standalone, but this does kind of follow on strongly from last month's session, where we looked at getting the right people on board. Each time we meet, we have a placemat, because all good family restaurants have colouring placemats, around the theme that you can use to write your own notes, colour in, fiddle with, that you want to. And it's just the one placemat covers both the last month's session and this month's session. And for people who haven't been before, there is a fabulous prize for the most colourful and inspiring placemat at the end of the session to encourage you to use it and decorate it and whatever. And it's a fabulous prize tonight. They just keep getting better and better. But those of you who are hoping that it might be a car tonight will be disappointed, I should say. Just, I don't want to artificially inflate your expectations. Yeah, it's not quite at that level. Anyway, so last time we looked at how to get the right people on the board, and tonight we're looking at how helping the wrong people overboard, or off the board. Sorry. No, it's because it's my son. It goes through when I turn it to silent. The family ones go through. Sorry about that. It'll probably ring again in a moment, and I'll turn it off again, and then it won't come through. Okay, so so we're focusing on getting the wrong people off the board, but we're also looking at, because that's hard, we're looking at every other alternative possible. So we're going to spend most of our time looking at how we can help people behave better, how we can get building on last month's experience about getting the right people on the board in the first place, and everything possible, because it's actually quite hard sometimes, if you ever try to do it, to get someone off the board, and often not pleasant. Prevention is, so just to remind us that prevention is always much better than having to deal with the problem afterwards. So how we recruit and develop board members, by identifying the right people who want to be there for the right reasons, involving and inspiring them, has a great deal to whether board members just sit on the board or serve on the board. And we want people who are going to serve on the board, and that's what we talked about at the last session. So the best method of making sure we don't have wrong people on the board is prevention. And to summarise that what gets good people on boards, there are basically two elements. The first is that we have a system for recruiting, orienting, training, and assessing people. Because the alternative to having a system is we end up with the accidental board. So if we just wait until a vacancy arrives and then desperately going around and tapping shoulders, or waiting for some unknown stranger to turn up to the AGM, unfortunately, I don't like to disillusion you, but it doesn't work out as nice as it does in the movies. The knight on the white horse doesn't always ride in just at the right point in the AGM. So we can end up, if we're not deliberate about it, we'll end up with what's sometimes called warm pulse recruiting. That's will lower our standards. So the only criteria is they've got a pulse and the body's still warm, and that's not the way to get the best people. We won't do good orientations or introductions to the organisation. The orientation will consist little more than introducing the name and telling them where the toilets are, and that's great at the beginning of the workshop as for health and safety. That's not how to make people a part of a board. Instead of assessing people, people will say, well, I'm just here as a volunteer. You can't tell me whether I'm doing a good, bad, or an indifferent job. And so we'll lower the expectations even more. And of course, there wouldn't be any need for training or development or improving skills, because we all just do what we do naturally anyway, because we're only a volunteer anyway. So that's what happens if we do nothing. That's the accidental board. We need to be intentional, and being intentional means having systems for all those bits: recruitment, orientation, self-assessment, training, and development. The other key thing that we talked about, as well as having systems, so that we deliberately seek the people that we need, identify what we need, then seek those people out. Sorry, let's get through that. Is that we need to have demanding expectations. The higher the expectations, the more likely we are that we'll get good people, and that gives us people who will look more likely to be accountable in self-reviews against those expectations, and are willing to do training and development to improve their performance against those expectations. So you get into that virtuous cycle. So, so that's really the goal. But sometimes things don't always go to plan, and there's lots of ways in which boards can be not very functional, and in which people behave in a way that's not useful for the organisation and the advancement of its mission, vision, and values. And that's what we're talking about. We're talking about bad behaviour or people problems. Basically, they're doing something that gets in the way or undermines our capacity to advance our mission, vision, and values. And in fact, legally, that's what we have a responsibility for when we come on the board. So if people are not supporting that, they're operating against their legal responsibility. So it's not a trivial matter. Sometimes these things come out in some symptoms that are called group think. And I just want to share a few of those with you. So that's where there's an illusion of unanimity, but that usually occurs by shutting up everyone who has a different view or intimidating people to self-censor so they don't express differences. And we rationalise our behaviour as the right way to go, even when it's not working out and not proving productive. And we start stereotyping other groups or anyone who has a different view, or any other organisation, or anyone who disagrees with us. Oh, and sometimes this also is accompanied by an illusion of invulnerability, so at its worst, the people think we can do no wrong. But that's probably a slightly rarer symptom of this kind of groupthink behaviour. So what I'd like to do is just in pairs where you are, and a couple of you will be threes. So, if you're four, including the baby, his name I forgot. Ella. If you be a group of four with Ella, because she's not going to say much, I guarantee.
She might.
You be a group of three, two. Have you recognised any of these symptoms, even in kind of slightly more subtle terms? I've exaggerated to try and make them more obvious in the way people can sometimes behave on boards. Let's have a chat. Have you recognised any of these? Okay. So, obviously still in full flight in that discussion, but hopefully everyone's had a chance to start thinking about these things. Are there any things that stood out for you when you started talking about that? Things that you did see or haven't seen? Other problem behaviours and tools that are not on that list? Or any things that you've got questions about or want to say something about things on that list? From anyone? Yeah.
I think sometimes when you are well functioning or perceived to be really well functioning, if somebody doesn't agree, then what's the voice that they can be seen as blocking the vote?
Right.
Whereas there should be at times a strong contest of ideas.
Yes.
And then you form a decision, everybody's supportive and you move on.
Yeah.
That pressure on the scene, I've seen that.
Yes.
Basically, you just become cheerleaders.
Yeah.
Rather than actually people having a strong.
Yeah. So, and it can be tempting if things seem, as you say, if things seem to be going along okay, to not want to rock the boat by having disagreement. Sometimes just different views are seen as conflict, which can be uncomfortable for some people to deal with. If we allow that kind of culture to develop in the organisation that doesn't allow any differences, then we easily start slipping into making very bad decisions, even if the ones up to now have been okay. Because part of the reason for having a group is having diversity. If we didn't need diversity, we wouldn't need a group. We could just appoint a dictator to run the organisation. But the way we've set up these organisations is to believe that there's more wisdom in a group than in any individual, and that we can balance each other to some degree. That's part of what it's about, balancing each other. So we need to make it easy for people to be different, to say things that are not, that they might not necessarily be readily acceptable, to come up with alternate points of view. And the healthiest organisations always do that, always have room for dissent and differences. If we're not, we have to start thinking about, have we got a diverse enough board? Are we allowing people to do the kind of blue sky thinking, come up with alternative ideas, or otherwise we will get stuck in that rut. Because being stuck in the rut is okay if you never want to innovate and if the world always stays the same. But I bet you there'll be some time in your organisation's life where either the world will change or you will need to do something differently. So we need to have that capacity to think differently about things. Does that make sense? Great. Any other comments or observations, things that stuck out, or other things that weren't on there?
Well, I just think it's really common.
Yeah.
I think it's seeps in everywhere, and I don't say that like it's always a bad thing. There's something good in having common values.
Yes.
Views,
Yeah.
But it's so common. We try to celebrate the differences, and when we bring people into our board and also our management team, we say, hey, expect to challenge each other. It's okay.
Yeah.
It's not about us.
Yeah.
It's just really common.
Yes. Yeah. And maybe not as extreme as some of those terms, but it can happen in little subtle ways. And I call some of those subtle things the sin of niceness, where no one wants to offend anyone by saying something different or might be seen as opposing someone else's point of view.
I think even the culture of the organisation, I think.
Yes, yeah.
Obviously, I'm still involved in a few different ones. We in this recently when one of the members wanted to go out for a project that was outside of our brief and that,
Yeah.
and some trustees were going to go with his idea, and that, and then we sat down and we talked about it, and we said no. And then we had an AGM recently, and the guy spoke out, and he was really upset that we'd gone against it.
Right.
But we were, because we've been such a tight group for a long, long time, as part of the culture, you know, you can split those things out, get them off your chest, and then everybody moves on.
Yes, yeah.
Because one of the other things summed up was saying we were a group of strong-willed people, so that sort of things
Yeah,
always can happen.
yes, yeah.
But I took on board that idea of yours of protecting the value of the, or
Yeah,
the value of the
Particularly the values of
organisation,
the
and
organisation.
that was the final decision because we were going outside our core
Values and
core
vision.
business really.
Yeah, yes. And so it's not necessarily an easy thing to encourage people to contribute counter views and then not go with them. But it's just as destructive to just go with a counter view because someone raised it as it is to stamp it out. So it's trying to build a much more sophisticated culture, a culture that says we want to hear everything and every view is valuable. And these are the criteria we're going to make our decisions on, what's best for the mission, vision and values of the organisation. And we will live with each person is not going to win every debate. But that's okay because we'll have better ideas for everyone putting their views in. It's a much more complex culture to try and promote than a culture where everyone is just nice to each other, or alternatively a culture where everyone just disagrees, and every time someone puts up a new idea, just gets shot down by someone else. So it's a much more sophisticated concept, but we can do it. And one of the best ways of doing it is talking about it and setting that out as the expectations for how we will behave around here. So some organisations have a code of conduct for their board members or trustees, and sometimes that just becomes a kind of official but not very meaningful thing. It's worthwhile thinking about how we could bring back and put more life into a code of conduct, which is something that expresses how we want to work as a group and some of the kind of key values and ways we will behave that will make sure we get better decisions in line with our mission, vision and values. So what I'd like you to do is to think about, in those same pairs or threes, just for a moment, 2 or 3 things that would be in a kind of living and vital code of conduct for trustees, for organisations like yours, that would build that kind of positive culture that would be the kind that we're talking about, the opposite of this. What would be some of the expectations that would be in that kind of code of conduct? Okay. We're going to interrupt you again. So I'm just going to see if I can get one suggestion from each pair or threesome. And if someone's already said yours, think of another one that came up. And if someone's taken all your good ideas, then just make one up on the spot or say pass. If you can't make one up on the spot. So we'll start over here, and you can't say pass or make one up on the spot because you get the first go.
That makes it easier for us, I suppose.
Yeah.
Well, the first one we come up with is ensuring everyone has the right to be heard.
Right. Don't say any more. Because you might steal someone else's idea. Okay, next script. Did you have respect each other? Yep.
Conflict of interest.
Right. So what we say for people to declare those?
Yes.
Yeah. Next.
Taking power away from the chairman to a certain extent, either rotating the chairperson on a 3-monthly basis.
Right,
or
right.
have an independent chairperson.
Right. Next bit.
We're talking about respecting the decisions that are made by the board, even if you disagree with them.
Right, okay. So some codes of conduct say things like, once a decision has been made by a group, I will agree not to undermine it or argue against it publicly if I don't support it yet. And the last one, did you have a...
Around attendance, but there are the teams will apologise.
Yep, yep. Okay, do you have any others that haven't come up yet? Going back. No, no. Next one.
We talked about the idea of being a frenemy,
Right.
friendly enemy.
Right, okay.
So the culture of friendly disagreement, just sort of being overt,
Yeah.
that we welcome disagreement, but we're good with it.
Yeah. Do you have any?
Like a single view can't be held more than a board view.
Right, okay. Yes. So that we board's view is fine.
I'd just like to say, I think what happens at the meeting stays in the meeting.
Right, yeah.
Yeah, because a lot of trusts, you need the transparency and things will be minuted and people can request minutes. So by having.
Yeah, I mean, that's fine, but I mean, the internal arguments or discussions should maybe stay in the meeting
And not be minuted.
and.
Yeah, close it should be
The board has to be.
So effectively what you're saying is the minutes are what everyone will say.
Yes.
Not different people saying their own versions of what happened at the meeting.
Ties in with that one, what was the,
Respecting the decision made by the board.
yeah, single decision.
Yeah.
One version of reality.
Yeah.
We talked about something our board hasn't done, which is to have that signed by each board member.
Right. We skipped it. What did you say? That's right. You're right. Haven't got any more. Right. Well, already saw your good ideas. And the last bit, Brad?
Who can speak or who can represent public views of.
Right. So who publicly represents?
Not really raising for media,
Yes, yeah, the process for that.
especially if one credible.
Yeah. So other kinds of things that people sometimes have is expectations about what's called, there's no such thing as a stupid question, or there's no such thing as a too wild an idea. Until we analyse and assess them, we want everything out there, we want all the questions answered. And the kind of flip side of that is about not censoring what you're feeling, so that you let the other people in the room know what you're feeling when you're in the room. Because often, if you don't, you can't hold it in forever, so you get these fabulous car park board meetings. Have you ever been in an organisation where all the real business gets discussed afterwards in the car park or the corridor? And people complain about what was done or who said what afterwards. So it's about being up front in the meeting as well.
I think that's a cultural thing as well.
Yes,
New Zealand
yeah.
people often might say what they're thinking.
Yes, yeah. So some of these will go kind of against our natural instincts, and some of them will go with it. So we need to kind of have those expectations clear that we want to promote. The value of actually going through at least two steps. One, talking about it as a group. It'll be much more useful if you talk about it as a group rather than give someone a code of conduct that was developed 5 years ago by another bunch of people. Even if you come up with the same answers exactly, and chances are you won't, you'll come up with something slightly different. But if people talk about it, they will have much more sense of ownership and they will understand it because they've talked about it. Reading something does not lead to understanding, and sometimes even when you put something in front of people's eyes, they don't read it anyway, especially if it's with a whole bunch of other guys. So, firstly, talk about it as a group. Sorry, I can't talk and spell at the same time. It's a damn nuisance. These whiteboards don't have a spell check on them right now.
Hold your finger on it.
But the other thing is not to stop it talking. You do need to write it down because writing it down forces you to be more precise. You can fudge things if you're just talking about it. And you say, does everyone agree? And you just agree, but they're not exactly sure what they agree on. But if you've got to write it down, you've got to be much clearer and more precise. And so, yeah.
Are you saying before somebody speaks, they should write it?
Oh, no. Sorry, what I mean is, after you've talked about the ideas, have it as a written document, not just a discussion. Yeah, that's why we talk about it, so that we understand. But then you write it down, once everyone's got agreement, and then you can be precise about it. And then the third optional one is this one that's already been suggested, by actually getting people to sign it. Of course, there's no greater legal authority in signing it or anything like that.
Excuse me.
But it does help people.
Signing what?
what you've written down as your agreed code of conduct.
Oh, okay.
Does that make sense? So you talk about expectations, write them up as a code of conduct for your organisation, and then all of the board members sign it. So as I said, it doesn't have any greater legal import just because it's signed, but it does help reinforce this is significant, because you tend to only sign significant things, you know, mortgages, and, legal agreements and things like that. So it just reinforces this is important. We're taking it seriously. It's not a trivial thing.
We had no surprises today.
Yeah. And I would definitely add say what you're thinking would be on my list, because I think that's really important. You could go on forever, but you want to probably no more than 8 to 12, or otherwise it just gets too big a list. But doing that list can be quite useful, because if you write down your expectations, you've got a much greater chance that people will behave that way. Whereas if you don't, you've got a much greater chance that they won't. It doesn't guarantee anything, but it does improve the chances. Okay, so I've got 2 things I want to introduce to you. I'm just looking on my mind which to do next. I think I'll do this one. It'll give you a little game to do. So I've got a whole series of types of board members or directors or trustees. So you might need to come a little bit closer around the table to do this. You can't all sit on around the table. I have got 2 pictures, but you can even come around the front as well. So in here you've got 2 lists, or you've got 3 lists of things actually. If you open it up, you'll see that there are some little pieces of paper that have bold on them. So where can everyone find that? Yeah, so here's one that's got the word trust on it. Just sort those out, the ones that have got a bold word at the top, a heading. You should have 1, 2, 3, 4. The reason for doing that is to remind us that often the desirable qualities are not at one extreme or the other. They're actually getting a balance. And sometimes we can easily fall into the trap. If we're more at one end, we will think that's the desirable end. So if we're a more dominant person, we might think everyone should be much more proactive and participatory. And so we're much more likely to see passive or non-contributing as the big problem rather than our end of the extreme. Does that make sense? For all of these kind of qualities. And life's much more complicated than that, and it's a continuum. Because these are not just 2 things, there's a whole line of gradients in between. And it's about getting the best balance, and the golden mean or the best balance is usually somewhere around that first line with the headings. So it's about getting the ability to influence, but to do it without being dominant, to have an opinion, but to not impose it on others, to be engaged, but not overly emotional, to make decisions when they need to be made, but not to be too rash, to make your contribution, but not be over talkative, to be polite, but not let that stop us from saying things that need to be said, to be prepared, but also flexible, that things can change as we go along, to be knowledgeable by preparing ourselves without thinking that we know it all, to have trust but always to be checking, and to have experience but still be fresh. So there are some of the kind of demands that we face. So and the thing is, the more we talk about the kind of culture, the kind of characteristics, and the kind of qualities that we want, the more we are likely to behave that way. So having conversations about what are the qualities we want, doing a code of conduct to say what are our expectations, the more likely we are to get that kind of behaviour in the boardroom. So just talking about it is the first and most important step in developing the culture that we want, so that we have clear and agreed expectations. It also means that when we do the self-assessment and the self-review as a board, we review ourselves against these expectations as well as other things. So it's not just, did they turn up and do the preparation, but did they also disagree respectfully? Can we have disagreements respectfully? And there's two extremes. We can be so respectful we never offer alternative views, or we're so disagreeable we put other people down. So it's, and we've got that balance right in the middle. Does that make sense? The other thing is that we all have different communication styles. And I'd just like to share with you some of my favourite annoying communication styles. And I'm going to put a list up, and what I'd like you to do is just individually select from that list the style that annoys you the most. You can only have one or two. You can't have the whole 20. You've got to narrow it down to just one or two. And then I want you to share that with the partner. And especially what I want you to do is to think about, rather than talk about the communication style that annoys you, I'd like you to think about how you react when you experience that communication style from others, when you're on the receiving end or you're in a room with it. Okay? So here's the... Oh, is that too small? Small. That is small. Most of us react by giving either subtle or not so subtle messages of disapproval or annoyance or intolerance. And other people pick that up. So what do you think that leads to? Disorder. Yeah. It tends, in my experience, it can lead to lots of kind of things, but in my experience it mostly leads to one of two things depending on the personality of the annoying person. They can either shut up and then not say anything, even the useful things that we're going to say later on, or they might double down and they will just do the annoying thing even more. I think there's something perverse about human nature, I don't know, that these humans, life would be so much simpler without them, but unfortunately can't live without them. So we've got to work with what we've got. But when we react with annoyance or irritation or disapproval, people generally pick that up. Not everyone, some people are insensitive nerds, but most people pick it up. Just to remind you, these are communication styles. They are annoying, but they're just different communication styles. And most of us will have some to some degree. The annoying thing I'd like to ask you to do now is to identify what's your risk, which is the annoyance that you're most likely to slip into of any of those. So if you feel confident enough, share that with your partner as well. But at least identify it for yourself. But I do need to remind people this is a workshop, not therapy, so I won't be responsible if you overexpose yourself emotionally or physically. Okay, we won't go there. Just say as much, share as much as you're comfortable with sharing, but have a think about which is the one or ones that you're most susceptible to yourself falling into? And if you're able to share that. Okay, so I think that's enough time for confession. Seeing as you've all confessed your susceptibilities, I should probably do the same. I think when I look at this list, probably, of course I don't do any of those things, but the things I might be most at risk of are a little bit of this arguing as a way of clarifying. I like to, I'm a debater by nature. I was great at debating at school, so I'll sometimes say things that I don't necessarily agree with to kind of sharpen up the ideas, and I quite like that because I think for me it helps get better ideas. But it's on someone's annoying list. One of the other things, I don't think I clothe disagreements with sugar coating, but sometimes I think I am a little bit susceptible to so much not wanting to offend people that I might say it so vaguely that they don't actually hear what I'm saying. You know what I mean? Just be so subtle that, you know, even I've forgotten what I meant. For fear of annoying people. Or not annoying people, but offending. But I hope it's not insincere. I don't feel like it is, but it's a little bit of that. The other one, of course, is I would never act smug, but I do know a lot of things. That was a joke.
Telling bad jokes should be on the
Telling bad jokes, is that a communication style?
Well, I guess so.
That's something I'm very susceptible to. My partner calls me the champion of dad jokes. Which I understand is the greatest insult you can give any human.
Yeah, I'm only new to the dad joke business.
I think your phone's
I got years of practice on you. So the point of this is reminding us that there are some things which are destructive and not very useful behaviours, and all of these could kind of get to that point. But also some of these are just different foibles and ways of doing things, different habits that we have. And we can't hammer out all the differences between us, and that's not the point. So what we do need to do is to work out how we can tolerate the differences that don't undermine the fundamental expectations. So if we're clear about what the fundamental expectations and what makes good behaviour, I think it can also help us tolerate some of the slightly annoying things, but they're not at the level of actually undermining this. Does that make sense? Or otherwise we can fall into the trap of treating everything that we don't like as of equally annoying or equally bad thing. Things that actually get in the way of making good decisions, and things that are just different. There are some people who like to make quick decisions, and some people who like to be reflective. There are some people who like to think out loud, and there are some people who like to do their thinking before they talk. This is all just about the diversity of this crazy bunch of people called humans. So we need to work out a way in which we can kind of build our muscles of tolerance for the things that are not going to make the fundamental difference. Though probably any of these to the extreme could. So it's not like it's a nice and simple thing. But if we've got some clear criteria of clear expectations, we can say, is this actually undermining some of these things that we've all signed up for?
That's kind of a good chairperson, to have that balance between this is just a little bit of tweakiness and the way you are, versus this is starting to be annoying.
Get in the way,
Get in the way, and I'm actually going to need to either that whisper to somebody else, that you guys will put that stop to me, because actually the chairperson doesn't actually deal with that, in my mind, really, so something surely has to be dealt with.
And sometimes the best way to work out, the dividing line between just a quirk and getting in the way is the impact it's having on other people. Although the chair can often most do something about this, I think we need to take some of the pressure off the chair by sharing this responsibility as an every board member role as well. So if someone is doing something, and especially if it's against like this, one of the things that I talk about when we do codes of conduct or board meeting expectations is that anyone can call anyone on it. So you can say, well, I think we're not really showing respect at the moment, or not in the best possible way. Let's just pull back a little bit from the argument and concentrate on the pros and cons rather than who's saying what. And anyone can say that. It doesn't have to be the chair. It is the chair's role, but if we put too much pressure on the chair, it can absolve the rest of us. We can all be the naughty schoolboys at the back of the room rather than equal participants. Yeah.
Well, an interesting sort of next step on that is our company, our senior management have a charter for their meetings, and that's actually an agenda item is to do an assessment on how they are meeting their charter or code of conduct, and how the 2-day monthly, or 2-day meeting every month or so, how they actually did to meet the criteria of that charter.
Yes.
And if you do that, then it's a really good way of making sure people are actually following up on it.
Stays alive. Yeah. That's a really good idea, and I recommend that we can do that in 2 ways. One is at the big annual or biannual review, and this is when we kind of say how are we going as a board overall, and do a slightly more formal review of how we're behaving. This should be, and what are we achieving? This should be some of the questions we ask. You know, are we scoring well on all of these things? But I also think there's a case for having a kind of 2-minute version of this at the end of each meeting. Yeah, how well did we live up to our expectations tonight? Were there other things that could help us? Were there some things that got in the way? And I'm on one board where we do that, and it really helps all the board members become a little bit more self-conscious about how we're operating the process. And that, it was not a problem board to start with, but I think it's lifted its behaviour even more from good to kind of excellent. Because we know at the end of each meeting there's a 3-minute discussion about this. It's like, you know, if you have a test, you teach to the test. You will behave much more consciously about the kind of expectations that they have. Okay, last little bit. I'm just going to skip some things that we don't really need to cover, and go down to so, okay, you do all this, and you've still got some bastard on your board that is destroying things. We actually have a responsibility not to ignore it. So it's great to try and prevent it in the first place. That's our first goal. Secondly, to try and reinforce it by the culture that we set for the organisation, and that's usually through expectations and through assessing against those expectations, as we've talked about. But in the end, there still might be people who they don't change. The behaviour is actually getting in the way of the mission, vision, values. So we do have to exit them or get rid of them. Before I talk about the 2 important principles in exiting, I want to talk about what I think is a bad method. Other people disagree, so this is very much the world according to Garth, this thing. So it's not necessarily accepted wisdom or best practice. But I think it's a mistake to rely on or to institute term limits to get rid of bad board members. Because if we do that, it means we have to wait until the term limit comes up before we get rid of them. So that means we've got board members on the board when they're not behaving well or they're being destructive. So I think, and it usually has to get to be pretty bad state before people start thinking about this. You know, we do tend to tolerate, because we're pretty laid back as Kiwis, we tend to tolerate quite a bit of differences. So it's often got very bad before this. So why wait another year of destructive behaviour? I don't think that's very useful. And I think an even more important reason for not using this to get rid of bad board members is that it equally gets rid of good board members without discrimination. And in small communities, whether that's small geographically or small because your area of interest or your cause is very specific or you're a particular illness or disability group. I've done some work with a couple of groups that only have relatively small numbers in the whole community across New Zealand who are affected. You may already have a limited pool of good board members. So why do we want to say they can't serve 10 years or 12 years if they're willing to commit themselves to it and if they're performing well and have something to contribute? So I think the board term limits are actually the wrong answer to the right question. Because then you get into the situation of saying, well, how long should the limit be? 3 years is obviously too short because if you've got good people, you might want them to stick around for more than 3. So do you get up to 12 years? So do you really want your bad board members to be around for 12 years? So because it gets rid of good board members at the same rate that it gets rid of bad board members, you can never get the right kind of balance. So that's why I don't believe it. But I know I'm a bit of a minority view on board term limits. But whether you believe in them or not, if you are going to get rid of someone, first of all, you need to know the legalities. So ideally, the step for expelling a board member would be spelled out in your constitution or failing your constitution in some other written document, like a policy or a procedure or a bylaw. The difference between constitution and any other document is any of those other documents can be changed at any time, so they are not as entrenched as firmly. That's an advantage sometimes, and it's a disadvantage at other times. So it depends how entrenched you want your method, whether you put it in your constitution or you put it in some other formally approved document that has some status. It's approved by the members or it's approved by, it needs 2/3 of the majority to change or whatever. But it is important, it's very useful that it's written down because then it's clear and everyone knows what procedure has to be followed. The important hint is if you're in the middle of a crisis, that's the worst time to write it down because people will be invested in the outcome and therefore they will design the process to get the outcome they want. The best time to write the process is when everything's going perfectly well and there's no one you would ever want to get rid of from your board. So that's the best time to write the process because people will just be interested in what's the best process to write down. So if you're in that lucky state now, write your expulsion clause tomorrow. Don't wait for the annoying board member to come along. Generally, those written procedures will need to follow what are sometimes referred to as the principles of natural justice. And if there's no written procedure, then it's expected, the number of court cases that suggest that we should follow the principles of natural justice. And they're much more complicated than this. Lawyers can earn their living on it, so I don't pretend to totally explain it in 2 minutes. But the two key bits of natural justice is that the person has a right to be heard and that the decisions are made without bias or predetermination. So that leads to several different things. Having the right to be heard means you need to know what you're accused of. So the person needs to know what the problem is, why they are being expelled, what is the behaviour that's unacceptable, and they need a right to reply to that, to explain it, or to justify why it's not what it seems. And sometimes, for example, in employment law, it's written in that they have a chance to remedy or rectify it as well. We don't necessarily have to offer that, but it's a good going the extra mile. That if someone's doing some bad behaviour, you talk about it with them, and if they say, "Oh, look, I'm really sorry, I wasn't aware of that," or "Well, I'd like to help to change that," to give them a chance to remedy, to give them a second chance, to give them some support that they might need to change that bad behaviour. But obviously that can't go on forever. And different people have different rules. You get one chance, you get two chances, or 3 strikes and you're out. Whatever way you want to do it. Every extra chance is a kind of bonus, but at some point, if the decision-making body is still not satisfied that this has led to change in the unacceptable behaviour, then you have to go through the rest of the steps of expelling. Sometimes that will mean, giving some notice. Sometimes it will mean going to a wider membership. But it's not necessary, and I don't necessarily recommend that things should need to go to a wider audience because it makes it a little bit more public. You don't go to your members or whatever. If people have a chance to have a say, and if the second principle is in place, which is that the decision maker makes the final decision without bias or predetermination. So that what you need to do that is to have some separation between the person who's complaining about the behaviour and the person who's making the decision. And sometimes you would have someone who is making an assessment or an investigation of what happened as well. So you could have 3 parties, but at least 2 parties. So whoever's making the decision, whether that's a group, which could be the whole board, a subcommittee, or whatever, is not exactly the same group that's making the complaint. So that because it's very hard to prove that you're not predetermining the decision if you make the complaint and then decide the outcome. It's the idea that the judge and the jury and the executioner should be 3 different people, not the same. Does that make sense? So that's the basic principles of natural justice.
If somebody is being called before the board, shall we say?
Yes, yeah.
Is it fair that that person has a support person?
Yeah, so in employment law in particular, that's made explicit. And the reason for that is it's about us saying, in order to really have their say, some people will need support. So having a support person kind of is a belts and braces thing. It means that you're not intimidating the person unnecessarily.
Sometimes it might be 5 or 6 against 1.
Yes,
5
yeah.
or 6 board members and here's the poor person.
Yes,
over here.
yes, yeah. So it can feel put upon in that situation. So it's not compulsory outside employment law, but it's kind of a positive practice. Yeah, a reasonable practice, I would think. Because to deny someone having a support person, I mean, why do you need to do that? It's hard to think of a good reason other than to put more pressure on.
Could that person, if they bring along a legal person to support them?
Yes, so that's why some people don't like support people, because it can escalate it to a legal battle beforehand. Sometimes the distinction is made between a support person and an advocate. So a support person is not an advocate. They are there to support. So they are with the person, they can go away and confer with the person, but they're not there to speak on behalf of the person, which as a lawyer might do.
These sort of things could be in the rules.
In the rules, yeah.
You can have an advocate.
Yeah. Because there are good reasons for not wanting to escalate something into a legal dispute too early. Sometimes it might get there at the end, but you don't want to do that unnecessarily. So that's the first of the 2 things. You need to know what's the legal process, and that will be determined by your constitution, as long as it doesn't cut across the laws of natural justice, because those court rulings will overturn if your process is manifestly unfair and doesn't have those 2 other components. So the other useful and important thing is to be able to implement the exiting with respect as well as firmness. And some people are good at being respectful and end up being very wishy-washy. And some people are good at being very firm, but is very aggressive and not very respectful of the person involved. The hard thing is to get the two together, get a nice balance of the two. So I'm one of those people who do not like conflict. Some people like it, they love it, they get into it. I do not. So I'm likely to err on the respectful and not be clear enough, not be firm enough. So that's the bit I know I've got to be more deliberate about. For other people, they might need to be more deliberate about the other side. I came across this website called Non-Profit Hearts. So it's www.nonprofithearts.net. So it's not .org, it's just .net. Just take it up to there, that's what we need to know. And on that, there's a whole lot of, in itself, very useful advice and handy hints and resources about managing what I call value-based leadership for non-profit organisations. And there's a section for managers and a section for board members. And in the section for board members, there's a bit on what they call firing a board member with grace. And if you Google that term, firing a board member with grace, this is the one that does tend to come up most of the time, this website, which suggests there's not a lot of websites called firing a board member with grace. Because people tend to go just into the legal bit of it and not into the human part of this. And that sometimes means it gets avoided, people who don't like that, but we have to do both. This website's worth a look at, and it talks about soft exits and hard exits. You thought you might have heard that before, but you've probably heard of soft Brexits and hard Brexits, but this website invented the term before Brexit came along. What they mean by soft exits are the board member who is actually just waiting to leave. And often that's the case where the board member who's not turning up, not as involved, not as committed, and they're really just looking for an excuse to go, but they don't want to leave because someone somewhere said, oh, you can't go until you find a replacement. I think that's the worst possible thing to say to someone. You know, when you need to go, go, or otherwise you're filling up a chair that we want someone good in. If you can help us find a replacement, great, but that's not your job and it's not the reason to stay in a position beyond the time when you can give your best. So they talk about the soft exit where they recommend the chair and the manager together, so it's a clearly kind of united front talk with the board member involved. And in that case, they say often it's just a case of approaching the board member and saying, look, it looks like you can't give the time and energy that you used to give or that you thought you could give when the election came along. Is that the case? Is that just a temporary thing and can you get back to contributing more? Or do you think the situation's changed now and it's really time to move on and have someone who can do that, who can make that commitment, come onto the board? And as I said, in the perfect soft entrance, at that point the board member says, yes, great, that's exactly what I was hoping for, or maybe says, oh, it ums and ahs a little bit, but basically very quickly gets to that because that's really what they were waiting for. So that's a nice, easy thing to do. They also give an example of what they call the hard exit, tough decision making, where the board member is engaged in negative behaviour. In this case, the person was being, I don't understand why this is negative, but the person was being argumentative in order to find out the best answer to a problem. They're always kind of wearing the black hat and pointing the problems and things. But they were doing it to such an extent that, so in itself, in a soft way, that's okay. But they were doing it so aggressively that other board members were feeling like they couldn't make a comment because they'd be shot down in flames by this person. So he's effectively shutting up all the other board members, and 2 or 3 other board members as a result were feeling so bad they wanted to resign because they like coming along to meetings just to feel bad when they could be at home watching Shortland Street. So it was beyond just being a diverse communication style; it was actually being destructive. And in this case, they had talked to the person twice before to say this is the effect you are having. And when it got to the point, and can you change? The person said they would, and they never did. It's got to the point where, as I said, 2 or 3 other board members are threatening to resign. So they come back, and this website gives a little script of how to respectfully say to the person, look, we know you've got the best of intentions, but the effect of what you're doing is undermining what we're trying to achieve as an organisation. It's leading to other people not being able to say what they think. We're not getting the value of everyone's views. It's undermining our mission, vision and values. We've given you a chance to change this. You haven't been able to change the behaviour. If anything, it's got slightly worse. We think it's time that you need to move on. That's the short version. But basically, they go through it nice and scripted. He objects and they respond to his objections. But it just kind of coaches you on how to keep firm, but do it in a very respectful way. And partly that's acknowledging what the other person is contributing, because it's rare for a person not to be contributing something. Even the most annoying person is usually contributing something, even if they just mean the best, but everything they do is terrible. Their intentions were good, but there's always something you can find. And in fact, in this, the manager says, I really like your critical thinking, and I'd like you to, if you're happy, to agree to having the odd morning tea with me to bounce around ideas, because I think that's valuable. But the way you're doing it is actually showing other board members up, and we can't have it at board meetings, so you have to, we need you to resign. And at the end of this process, which is a bit longer than I've described, but they do it in one meeting, the chair then says, so the choice is up to you. You can resign now, or if you don't, we will go through the process of formally expelling you. And of course that means it is slightly more public, because we have to have a notice at our next board meeting, we have to take it to our members, and we have to take a vote, and we have to explain the reasons why we are expelling you. But the choice is yours. Because in the end it is, no matter how much you want the person to resign and take the easy way out, they can fight it all the way. But faced with that, the person, and as most people will do, decide to resign. But in the end, you do need to be prepared to follow through if they don't, the formal process that goes back to step 1, the legal steps that you need to go through, what's spelled out in your constitution, and you need to know them before you embark on this process. Does that make sense? Yeah. So I just found it really helpful, because no one else talks about these in quite the way they have, and I don't think I've seen anyone else get the balance right like they have. So I found it a really useful resource, which is where we're going to finish. Now that we've sacked all the board, there's no one left, we can all go home. So next month, as you heard, we're going to talk about confident oversight of the finances. So we're not going to talk about how to be an accountant. We're going to talk about what is our role as board members, and how can we be confident enough as board members that everything's going well with the finances in an organisation, and all accept responsibility for that, not just because there's one person on the board who might be called the treasurer who understands numbers, and we just say, oh well, if she or he says it's okay, it's okay. Because legally, we're all responsible if something goes wrong. So we'll talk about that next month. See you then.